Hi there, welcome back to Minimalist Terrain. Now we've got an awful lot of basics to cover off, so instead of sitting through long-winded videos, what I'm going to do is do a couple of short ones like this, where I'll go through a number of very quick tips. So we'll cover it off in a few minutes and then you can just get cracking. Number one, if you're in a place where unfortunately for whatever reason you can't get hold of XPS foam, you're going to need an alternative way of making building blocks or bricks or things like that. I'm one of those people. This is what I use. You'll recognise it as a camping mat. The thickness of the foam is a good size for the height of a stone block in our scale. Just remember, when you're cutting it out, you want to be taking off strips along the width of it. Otherwise, when you get to the end of the roll, you're going to end up with a brick like this. So, here's a piece that I've already been taking some blocks out of. Now, the trick to get a little bit of texture behind them, and you just use a pair of scissors for this, it cuts very, very easily. The trick is not to use big snips like this, but little ones like this. Here, I'll show you. We just take what we think to be a reasonable width for blocks, and we just do little snips and take a whole row out. The reason we're doing those little snips is just to get a little bit of texture onto the edge of the block, and then to finish them off, there you are, irregular stone blocks. Number two, rather than using a pallet, try these. Use drink bottle caps. We have to remove them from the bottle before the bottle goes in the recycling, and these are just supposed to go in the landfill. Well, before you do that, use it for mixing either paint or PVA in. Because it's got an edge to it, if you're making a mix or a blend of paint, then you're not spraying it all around the palette and wasting most of it. You're actually keeping it in a nice enclosed area. Then, once you've used it, throw it out. If you're using it to mix PVA in, remember, because it's actually got a high side to the lid, it means that you can add your PVA and water and mix it gently, and it's not going to go all over the place. Let's talk about ground cover. Basing material, flock, colour what you will. Let's talk about dirt and rocks first. I remember a really old article that said that the best way to get a realistic ground cover for anything like rockfalls or things like that was to start with your largest material, large stones and things like that, glue them on first, and then gradually work down, gluing on the next size of material and then the next size of material, and then eventually down to the sand. But let's face it, because part of the reason for this channel is to make sure that we're making the best use of our crafting time as we possibly can, I use blends of material. So, let's start out. Number one, basic sand. Great if you can source it straight from the beach or something close by. If not, get a bag of builder's sand from your hardware store, sieve out the larger particles and use the small stuff. Number two is a mix. At the moment, yes, I have got a bag of builder's sand and that's what I use. It's got slightly larger pebbles in, and at our scale they're starting to look a little bit more like small rocks and things like that. Back at the start I used to use base sand and model railway scale HO track ballast, I think it was called. Really small chips. You'll find it in any railway modelling store, and it's not that expensive. Number three, start adding in to that number two blend something like tank gravel. Small stuff. You want rough cut. You don't want the rounded pebbles. Well, you might want the rounded pebbles, but personally, so that I can use it for anything like shattered masonry or natural rock falls or things like that, I'll go for a rougher cut small chip. And then number four, add in some coral sand if you can get it, or a larger grade of fish tank gravel. Just remember that when you're applying it to your model, it's going to be the smaller grade stuff that ends up getting stuck mostly to the model, and it's going to be only small amounts of the larger grade. So when you're taking your jar, and do make separate jars of the stuff and label it, when it comes to top up your jar, it's going to be more of the small grade stuff like the sand or the track ballast that you're adding to it to top it up, rather than the larger stuff. The larger stuff, you'll get odds and ends sticking to it that'll make it look like reasonable sized chunks, but it's mostly going to be the smaller stuff working down the scale. If, like me, you're also into more modern ruins or post-apocalyptic stuff, just remember that you can use small offcuts of things like wire or modelling sprue or anything that's got a small interesting shape, things like that. Mix them in with your blend. They'll take the place of some of the larger pieces like the coral sand, but it does give it a very distinctive looking ground cover. Here's an example. This model is obviously post-apocalyptic, and I've used a mix of the third grade, that's the builder's sand, plus the smaller fish tank gravel, along with some offcuts and things like that, and they have been picked out in a sort of darker rusty brown to show modern debris that's been mixed in with all the rubble that's going on around it. Let's talk about flock. Again, I use a blend. I don't use a single colour. If it's going to be a piece that is signifying sort of high summer, then I'll use a medium green flock coupled with a light green flock. Get them in the jar, mix them together. That blend just gives it that little bit more depth, and it's dead easy. It's still only one coat. If I want it to be late summer going into autumn, then I'll use a light green and mix it with straight sawdust. So you've got that sort of withered look. Anything that's to do with undead, I may just use straight sawdust because, hey, they always wither stuff. Just remember, if you're using large things like bushes or trees, you probably also want a really dark brown flock, because if you look at them out in the wild, they always get leaves and things like that dropping to the base. They mulch down, they rot, and you always manage to get a sort of dark brown, almost black, rotted circle of vegetation around the main trunk of that root. Remember to use that. Number 4. Since we were talking about mixing PVA, let's talk about what you should use. I would probably recommend 1 part water, 1 part PVA, and just a dash of dishwash liquid or detergent, whichever you want to call it. Why do we use that? First of all, PVA, that makes stuff stick. 2, water, it makes it runnier, so you get a better flow around things. 3, the detergent breaks down the surface tension of the liquid in itself, and when you apply, whether it's ground cover or flock, it allows your liquid to flow up and around and enclose all of that stuff, and it gives it far better cover and adhesion. And finally, number 5. Crafters are often asked what the most important tool is that a new crafter can buy, well, apart from things like knives and paintbrushes and things like that. I have an opinion on this, and it's none of the expensive things like a hot wire cutter or a 3D printer or anything like that. In my opinion, it is the humble hairdryer. Beg, borrow, steal one of these. It is the greatest time saver that a crafter has. It doesn't matter what project you're doing, you're going to be using paint on it, and the ability to force dry your paint is going to save you so many hours in potential crafting time that you won't be able to count. There you are. This one has to be about 30 years old, still going strong, still use it all the time. Anyway, it's at the end of the video. You know what to do. Like and subscribe if you want to. Share the video by all means. Otherwise, get on with some crafting.